So as you heard, it'll be recorded and distributed. Session isn't about selling hardware or selling MSP services or anything like that today. It's just showing you about how to evaluate your MSP team or your IT team. I'll probably use MSP more often than IT team throughout this presentation, but they apply across both, whether you outsource your IT or keep it internal. Basically, we want to know, are they protecting you? Or are they quietly putting you at risk? I think this is important if you're a compliance officer or an executive or a partner, and ultimately you're responsible for cybersecurity. So everything we'll talk about today is kind of derived from my real world experience in auditing firms that are required to report to the SEC. So for those that don't know me, my name is Brian Hahn. I'm a consultant with MTradecraft. I work pretty much exclusively with SEC-registered firms, RIA, hedge funds, family offices. I'm a brain trust to my clients, meaning I don't hold biases. Again, I'm not selling any software, hardware, vendor services, MSP services. My job is to work with clients and understand their needs and then build out a solution for them. I guess the one bias I do have is obviously, towards budget and obviously security and privacy. So, for my clients that do use MSPs, a lot of times we've gotten to there because we've evaluated everything and just determined, manpower issue or something like that, an MSP service was for them. So today, I want to give you some of the red flags, that I see as I go through and do these type of audits. And I'm going to jump in and out of the presentation here as I'll kind of show you around a little bit. We're going to have a recording of this. I distribute it on my YouTube channel that you can see here. So, easy to grab recordings of videos or go back and catch any topics. I think there's a little over 40 videos here now, just on a wide range of topics. So it's a great way if you want to catch up. I'll touch briefly on a lot of these topics, and if you need to dive in deeper, these videos will definitely get you there. Also reference my homepage a lot and the information that we find on it. So if you head to our homepage, mtradecraft.net, and scroll down, you'll see the intelligence reports. These are probably the 6 most popular downloaded forms off the website. Whether you're looking at AI, we have secure and compliance, which you'll hear me refer to, which is basically just an X-ray at trying to understand what an SEC cybersecurity examination looks like. Not long ago, we did the compliance blueprint for anyone who's trying to walk through this with their firm. Mock audit and the RIA cybersecurity policies and procedures manual is one that I'll reference quite a bit in today's webinar. And all of these are accessible through our Brain Trust membership. The lowest membership is absolutely free. You don't need a credit card or anything to join. Just sign up. It's more about asset protection and intellectual protection. But in that, you'll get access to a lot of information. I think one of the most useful is going to be the SEC and FINRA cyber regulations page. We'll touch briefly on these on today's webinar, but this is ultimately going to be your go-to source to go. You can actually click on these. It'll walk you through exactly what each one of these might mean for your firm, especially with the new regulation SP requirements out there. So within the Brain Trust, we're going to talk about a lot of the compliance templates and the reasons that we build compliance templates, because again, we can be as secure as we can in the world, but if we don't have the documentation around that, we really can't prove it to the SEC. So with the Brain Trust, you get access to a lot of these documents to go through, download them. They're templates that you can work on, quite a few here that you can download and use as you need. So let's talk about the problem, okay? For those that don't know, MSP or managed service providers offer their services as basically saying, hand everything over to us. We'll manage the infrastructure. We'll put everything together. We'll secure it. We'll handle backup, data recovery, IT issues. And basically what we know from looking at SEC written statements and past examinations is that ultimately we can outsource the IT work, but we can't outsource the accountability, right? So how do we go through and make sure the IT company or our our IT team or our MSP is actually doing this work? And this is very important given the SEC's kind of guidance that the executive, the board level, the partners need to be on board with all cybersecurity decisions. So how do we actually prove that IT is doing what they say? And ultimately, what it comes down to is there's two fundamental issues with all managed service providers, not so much with internal IT teams, but with all managed service providers, okay? There is this real balance between convenience and security and privacy, okay? The more secure and private something is, the less convenient it is to access that information and vice versa. Something's out there and super easy to access, anyone on the web can get to it, it's not really that secure and private. So the problem with this is that RIAs want high levels of security and privacy, and MSPs want high levels of convenience, and it's built into their business model. Their business model is to take a template of an IT infrastructure and apply it to as many different firms as they can, and do it in a way that they can replicate that work with as few people as possible on the IT desk. And what and if you've been in this industry for a while, what we've seen is a lot of these MSPs that were geared towards SEC firms have now gone to outsourcing, that IT work to the Philippines and other third parties. And a lot of that's really gone downhill, especially as a lot of these smaller MSPs have been wrapped up. The other side of that is that template that they distribute is often not built for RIAs or anyone that has SEC compliance. It's built for small businesses. And there's really not that much that they do outside of their RIA client as they do for some random packaging company in town. Okay, so there's a big issue there. And the reason we don't sell MSP services is because no one has broken that yet. There's no good way, especially when you consider how my clients operate, their different systems, their different custodians, the things that they have to secure, and the documentation that they have to create. There's no secure and private way to do that conveniently and be profitable on it. So that's always been one of the issues there. The other core issue is, MSPs are always saying, put your data in the cloud. It's the most secure place to be. And that's just absolutely false and incorrect. Anyone that is telling you having your data in the cloud is trying to sell you services in the cloud. It's just as simple as that. Anyone that's telling you they can secure that data is trying to sell you security services in the cloud. Your local IT team is, when they're deploying cloud, it becomes a balance between, can we secure it enough to make it viable? If we're if we work at the CIA and we are charged with starting an RIA to manage CIA employee retirement plans, chances are there's no cloud in the world we're going to want to put that data on, right? So there's this balance that the IT team is trying to figure out when deploying to the cloud versus when to keep things local. But 100% without any exception, having local data outside of the cloud, data that we can turn off, we can disconnect, and we can physically hug is always more secure than having it in the cloud. So there's some fundamental things there that prevent MSPs from being the kind of golden solution that I think a lot of firms think that they are. Again, we'll just kind of briefly cover regs here. If you want to dive into these, jump back onto my website. You can go into these in detail. But ultimately for SEC firms, we're looking at 20647, 2042, SID, and especially SP now, as we've had the new updates to that. A lot of these are going to stipulate what kind of documentation we need from the MSP in order to prove they're doing what they're doing. And same for FINRA below. Again, won't dive into them too much here, but these are basically the overriding framework for the suggestions that you're going to get today. so let's briefly cover what I'll call the icebergs. And I mean, I kind of struggled to figure out which ones to talk about, because I've done a little over 250 audits. And when I do them, these are the things that I see that I start to go, okay, we're going to have a problem here. We need to look a little bit deeper. Okay. Especially if an MSP is involved. If I'm working with a client and, I'm introduced to the MSP as the consultant, and hey, we're here to do a compliance audit, we're going to build out this documentation. One of the first things I'm looking for is that MSP eager to see the results? Okay. I have some firms, and these are the firms that I'll mention to my clients, but they are excited because they feel like when we're doing an audit, they are getting a free audit because they're getting a report card. They want to get better. They really want to prove that they're doing what they're doing. And then we have other firms that start to push back and they go, well, I don't know, we've never done this before. We've heard all kinds of excuses. So that's the first key. Are they eager to see the results of what we have? When they are, it's awesome, because at the end we sit down in a meeting, we talk about what we found. There's a back and forth. They talk about what they're doing, we talk about what we're doing, and it becomes a very collaborative process, which is really easy. But a lot of times MSPs do get fired after these audits because of what comes up, mainly being the lack of documentation, not being able to prove that they're doing what they're able to do. And we'll talk about all of these things in more detail. DMARC settings. When I see DMARC settings missing, I know there's going to be deep problems without. I'm going to find multiple issues and it's going to be a disaster. So I'll show you today how to check if your firm has DMARC settings correctly set up. MSPs generally are remote. They're not on site with you, so they are using some kind of remote access when there's a network problem to get in. A lot of times they're using Microsoft Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDP, or TeamViewer, or there's a host of different ones that we'll talk about. And I'll show you a way that this can become a problem if they haven't properly secured your network. And we'll look at other things, what kind of private data and video leaks are out there. And I'll actually show you how to go out and search this information about your firm and see if it's there. So it's going to be a cool webinar. The last thing we'll talk about is something that is a little more in depth, but for the most part, MSPs are going to pitch cloud services, whether it's AWS, Rackspace, Microsoft Azure. There's a host of them out there. What we need to know is, have they actually deployed this correctly? Okay, did they just launch it and deploy it and not configure it, or did they actually set it up so that it makes our firm more secure? Again, if we're going to put it in the cloud, it's not to say that it's 100% insecure. It's just saying that we have a lot of work to do to make sure our data in the cloud is secure. So we want to make sure that MSP is doing that. The things I like to look for: are they using the same admin access across all of their clients? Big problem if they are. We've seen major hacks unfold because of that, where one MSP gets hacked and now all of their clients are also hacked. Are they suppressing patches and updates? MSPs hate patches and updates. Why? Because we've all turned on Windows in the morning and it goes through a 30-minute update, and then you get a blue screen of death and you have to reset it. We've all been through that. And it happens with updates. Microsoft updates are notorious for breaking. I'm not that much in the Mac world. Maybe Macs are too. I'm not quite as sure, but Microsoft is pretty bad. So as an MSP, you're not that eager to go out and roll out these patches. In fact, one of the guys on the phone today, we were talking about this yesterday. He sets up a test environment every time there's rollouts just to make sure that none of his deployment breaks, which is awesome, right? Like, that's what you want to be doing, but it is a lot of work, and most MSPs don't do that. Two-factor authentication not being enforced is another one, right? Like, we can't have any excuses for not having two-factor authentication on every account for every individual. There's no exception to that. There's no reason to have any exception to that. So we see a lot of that where they'll leave an admin account without 2FA. Why do they do that? Again, it comes down to that security versus convenience. If they're administering 30 different remote environments a day, that's 30 two-factor authentications roughly every hour that they're having to enter. It's a lot of work. Why go through it? The last is kind of backups and encryption. not being properly stored. We see that a lot. They're not properly encrypted, or they're stored in a public cloud that's accessible to anyone. A lot of issues there. So I'll kind of walk you through what I do to go through and audit these cloud environments. Okay, let's first start with the documentation. All right, if you've downloaded my policies and procedures manual, you'll know the way I set it up is, so that we have to go through and say, okay, we're doing this, now we need to prove it. I won't go through every one of these things here, but I have in the next 2 slides about 8 different items that are the first things that, when I'm brought on as a consultant, I'm checking that we have. I'm requesting from the MSP because these are kind of the bare minimum I need to build a solid set of compliance documentation. All right. When we're looking at just kind of governance and oversight, do I have SOC reports? Have they signed vendor due diligence, vendor attestations? Do I have their insurance certificates? I need to have all this stuff to show that we are doing, our work and they're doing their work. Access control and authentication, kind of like I said, are they making sure that all of our users are properly segmented as well as all of their other clients? Patch and vulnerability management, I'm looking at that. Network and email security documentation. We'll talk more about this, but this is one where more often than not, email is just not properly set up, or we're not collecting the correct reports on it. There's usually something going on there that we need to discuss. Backup and disaster recovery, we kind of talked about. A lot of times they're just not doing it properly. Remember, these regulations stipulate how often we need to be making backups, what that backup system needs to look like. In other words, we can write to it, but we can't delete from it. We need, every version of documentation history that we have. So the question is the MSP doing that? And also the monitoring, detection, and incident logs. So this is always one of my favorite, and because, when I'm brought in to do an audit, we'll talk to the client, and a lot of times they will elect not to let the MSP know we're doing this audit, whether it's a penetration test or just a vulnerability scan. So when I start to do my work, of course, I've been authorized to do it. The firm has signed off on it. And of course, unlike a hacker, I have a limited time frame, right? We have a 2-week scope to complete the audit. Whereas a real world hacker could take months. They could be really slow and work into your network without making a lot of noise. I come in like Rambo, okay? I am making a ton of noise. I am beating on the website. We're beating on firewalls. We're sending a ton of packets and information around the network, testing things. And if the MSP doesn't pick up on that, there's a major problem, okay? Because we do it in an unauthenticated fashion. We are basically replicating what a hacker would do. So are they able to detect that? If not, why? Like, that's a question we want to ask to them, because we'll have a ton of documentation that shows, hey, look, we sent 3 gigabytes of information through the network and you didn't catch a single bit of it. What happened? Okay. Incident logs, most of them aren't going to have them. Cloud services, software as a service controls, we'll talk a little bit more about that, such as Azure. Have they set it up correctly? Have they gone through some kind of benchmarking to make sure it's set up correctly? If not, I'll show you how we do that for them. And then, of course, just, privacy breach response documentation. This is going to be big with the new Reg SP. We'll see, kind of how it finalizes, but ultimately, what is going to be their notification to you if they have a breach? What are they obligated to? What are they collecting? Are they doing correct secure destruction of data? These are all things that we need to know in order to complete our compliance documents. And then the annual attestations, where we're going through and reviewing everything on an annual basis. You'll hear me talk about our CRVT report. This is where that one comes in handy, because it's basically the report where we go through and say, hey, this is what a hacker sees when they look at your firm. And then we can take that report and go to the MSP and going, hey, what's going on here, right? So let's start getting into the cool stuff. Let's start talking about threats and how hacks happen, okay? And I think one of the key takeaways from this to be is just how vulnerable your data could be. And I think you'll kind of see this as we walk through it. The reality of threats. We know that 71% of threats are going to come in through a phishing environment of some type, okay? One of our employees is going to make a mistake. They're going to click on an email 71% of the time, and we'll kind of show some instances of that. Unpatched vulnerabilities. We'll show you a case study of how the Equifax breach went off from this. But ultimately, we want to understand the reality of the threats that we're facing, because then we can build our defenses and know what we really need to focus on, okay? Most of us APTs are not going to be a major threat. Now, if you tell me you have, you just bought a warehouse and filled it full of Bitcoin servers and that's your thing now, yeah, we're probably going to have a higher APT threat or a hacking type threat. Whereas if you're doing financial planning, chances are you're going to have a kind of a drive-by shooting type attack where they find an unpatched vulnerability or someone accidentally clicks on an email. So, you know, the reality of threats is different for each firm, but for the most part, this is what it looks like. Let's talk about the enterprise attack surface. And this surface is different for each firm, okay? And we're diving in here to understand what an actual hack looks like and what an MSP should be doing, okay? So on this graph over on the left, we have attack vectors. How can we be attacked? These include things like weak credentials, people using stolen credentials, which we'll show an example of that. It could be a malicious insider, unpatched vulnerabilities. And then along the other line, we have the devices and the applications that are on your network, okay? Desktops, laptops, mobile devices. Have you allowed to bring your own device policy? Well, now we have a huger attack surface that we have to watch, right? It just gets larger and larger and larger as we add more systems. So let's flatten that just so we understand what this actually looks like in reference to, say, the Equifax breach from a couple of years ago. And you may hear the term pivot or hackers pivoting within a network. This is what those pivots look like, okay? So with Equifax, the first breach happened because of an unpatched vulnerability on a publicly facing server. And we'll show some examples of how you can find these servers, right? How did hackers actually find this? From that, they found a misconfiguration on storage, a storage database. They then pivoted to Active Directory because of shared passwords. They then grabbed stolen credentials for the firewalls so that they could move through the network, which then led to customer data loss across multiple platforms, okay? So these are attack vectors, and the attack vectors happen throughout the surface. And the idea is that we want to know, where are we most vulnerable? Where is our data, and what kind of vulnerabilities are on that data that someone could get to? Okay, the first thing I talked about was DMARC. And we'll show here an example of how you go and check if your firm has DMARC records. This is a big one that MSPs skip, and I'll explain why in a second. So what a DMARC record does is help protect us from being subject to doppelganger attacks or domain takeovers or domain spoofing, okay? So what happens in an email chain? From your firm, you send an email, your email server sends that to the receiving server. And the receiving server has a couple of different checks that it makes from that email. Your email is going to have an SPF, a DKIM, and a DMARC record. The receiving server then goes back to the DNS, which the DNS is like the yellow pages of the internet, okay? If you are abcwealth.com, when you bought that domain, you set up your DNS settings, and your DNS settings included things like your SPF, your DKIM, and your DMARC records. And you know that shows that you own the domain. You set these records. So the email server is going to respond to that DNS. It's not going to respond to the sending server because we don't know whether we can trust it or not. It's going to respond to the DNS and say, hey, I just got an email. Here's my SPF, DKIM, and DMARC records. And that DNS is going to say, yep, that's an authentic email. And if that's the case, it's going to send through and say, accepted as a validated email. That DMARC record is going to come back and say, accept as a validated email. Let's say it's not, okay? Let's say I am a malicious hacker and I go and open a Salesforce account and I say that I am ABC Wealth. I hope ABC Wealth isn't on the firm or on the call today. I'm simply making this up out of the air. But let's say that I say I'm ABC Wealth to Salesforce, and Salesforce says, cool, you're ABC Wealth. They set up a CRM. I load it full of people that I want to attack. Maybe it's your clients. And I start sending emails and I say I'm ABC Wealth. And those emails are sent from the Salesforce server, okay? That Salesforce server is going to send it to the email server, the receiving server, which is then going to go check the DNS records, okay? Now, if you did set up Salesforce, if Salesforce was a true deployment for you, Salesforce would give you DKIM records that you would then publish to your DNS. And that email from Salesforce, even though it came from the Salesforce server, would authenticate as if it truly came from you, okay? So what happens if we don't have DMARC records? If we don't have DMARC records, and I send that email through, the email server, the receiving server is going to check with DNS, and DNS is going to go, nope, not for me. SPF and DKIM does not check out. And then the DMARC record tells it what to do with that. Okay, so if the receiving server hits the DNS and the DNS says, nope, this is a fake email, this is a hacker, then DMARC would respond to that receiving server and say, reject that email, throw it away. Don't even look at it, right? Don't even deliver it, so that that recipient doesn't even know it happened. If you have no DMARC record, that email is going to be delivered, and it's going to be delivered, and it's going to have a little banner at the top that says this email may not be from the domain it says it is, which we've all gotten those, right? Like you see, when people set up marketing campaigns through MailChimp or something, a lot of times that will happen. Some people take notice, a lot of people don't, and it looks like an email that came from you. So why do MSPs leave DMARC records off is the big question, okay? There's only two answers to that. One, they don't care about your security. Or two, they have no idea what they're doing. Those are the only two answers to why DMARC records would be missing from your server. The real reason they're missing is because it can cause problems. If you do have a CRM attached to your domain that sends emails, maybe you have Wealthbox or Redtail that sends emails on your behalf. This would be an example of that. Maybe you're using MailChimp, and instead of setting up the DNS correctly, it's easier to leave off the DMARC records so that the MSP doesn't have to worry about emails being delivered, okay? Another major problem is when we don't have DMARC records, we don't get email reports from email servers. So with DMARC, we start to get an email that lets us know, is someone spoofing our, is this happening? Is someone trying to spoof our email and send it out? Or it can be a great forensic file. If, John Smith from trading comes up and says, hey, I sent 3 emails and they didn't get delivered, this report would tell us why our legitimate emails aren't getting delivered. And this is a key report to have for compliance. It's hard to make a reason that we can make a secure compliance file without having this report. So 100% a firm has to have DMARC, okay? So let's jump out of the presentation here for a second and jump to a little program. Zohomail.tools is the program I use a lot. It's free. You can visit it in a browser, zohotools.com. There's a couple other systems out there. If you go to Google and search DMARC record check, you're going to find quite a few. But I like Zoho Mail Tools, and this is the link I generally give to people to use. As an example, I tossed in goldmansachs.com here in the domain name, and I clicked look up. And what we're getting here is all the records. So we can see these name servers that Goldman Sachs uses. They have goldmansachs.info, goldmansachs.biz, gs360.net. We can start to see all these domains that are set up on their DNS. Okay, so we're getting all this information from that DNS server. We can see their SPF record that we talked about. As it loads, of course, it's always so much slower when you're trying to do a presentation. Let's click look up here. And I use Goldman because they're actually a great example. Everything is set up really cleanly here, even though it is not pulling up at the moment. For the SPF record, it is there normally. But here's their DMARC record that I was talking about. Okay, so what happens here? What this DMARC record is telling us is, if I set up a CRM and pretended I was Goldman Sachs and I sent out an email, the DMARC record would bounce back and it would say, reject that email. P equals reject. The policy is to reject emails. And then they have these RUA reports and these RUF reports. The RUA report is an analysis over all the emails that were sent out. Okay, what went out, what was delivered, what problems ran into. And the RUF report is a forensics report that comes in, tells you everything that could have gone on. Goldman has these pointing to Proofpoint, which is a service that monitors DMARC records for any issues. Systems like Proofpoint, a lot of them are very expensive. Okay, you're going to go out and you're going to price them and you're going to be like, holy cow, these are expensive. It's $100 a month. It's not worth it. Why are we doing it? Just kind of a quick shortcut here and a tip for firms that don't have the budget. What's going to happen if you're missing DMARC records? Okay, so go type your domain in here. You can click lookup and see if you have DMARC records. If they're missing, there's just going to be nothing here. And that's when you have to reach out to whoever set up your domain and say, which is it? Do you not care about my security, or do you not know what you're doing? And get an answer from there. A lot of times they'll pitch these DMARC services. What's going to happen? You're going to start getting an email that comes in daily. Okay, I usually tell my clients, hey, just set up an email filter, have that email go into a folder. You don't have to check these reports daily. Only check them if you suspect there's an issue, or if you're going through, your annual compliance review. It's great to jump in and spot check a few of them. The reason people sell a service is because they come in a format called .xml. You're going to get an email with an attachment that has a .xml report, and if you click on it, it's going to look like a bunch of gibberish. ZohoMails.tool, they have a DMARC report analyzer. So if you click on it, you can click on Browse Files and upload that XML file. And when you do that, it'll print out a nice report to show you exactly what's going on with your email servers. Did you have any deliverability issues? Was anyone trying to phish you? So DMARC records are a big one. Okay, we know phishing is going to be an attack vector, so we want to make sure we secure it. We want to make sure someone can't send out documents to our employees or to our clients that look like they come from us. Okay. All right, the next one we want to talk about is Shodan. And the idea here is that your vulnerabilities are extremely easy to find, okay? If you understand this picture here and what's going on here, then that is either a clue to your age or your level of nerdiness, okay? This is a clip from the movie War Games. If you're not familiar with War Games, it's I think an early 82 movie about a young hacker, Matthew Broderick, and he is trying to break into computers to play video games like any teenager, but he accidentally breaks into a government war computer and starts playing global thermonuclear war against the Pentagon, and it becomes a disaster and unfolding. But in this scene in the movie, Matthew Broderick is dialing all of the phone numbers in the area code for where that game provider is to see who has a computer going. Okay, and it's kind of cool. You're like, wow, he's just mass scanning and looking for it. Well, today that happens on steroids. Let me show you what that looks like. Shodan.io. Okay, this is the Google for hackers. If I want an article on financial planning, I would go to Google, I would search financial planning, and it would give me a list of top-rated blogs to read. But let's say I had a vulnerability or I had an attack that I wanted to conduct. Well, I would go to Shodan and I would find systems that are connected to the internet that would be susceptible to that attack. Basically, Shodan scrapes the entire internet and looks for anything that is connected. It maps it, and so we can go in and take a look at it. So when you go to Shodan, this is the home page. We'll just kind of scroll around a little bit so you can get a feel of what this looks like. For instance, let's just click on Browse Images and see what that pulls up. Hopefully this will pull up and we can do it in real time. If not, I've got some already set up here to the right, but let's see if we get it. Okay, so we just searched for images. We had 616,000 results for different images. These are all around the world, okay? Most of what you're seeing right here are going to be remote desktop connections and security cameras, webcams. You know, a lot of times this is people have no idea that their Ring doorbells, that their that their cameras that they set up are just leaking out to the world. And as you can see on the timestamps here, these are all live 10/16. So this is going to be probably somewhere over in the east, but these are all live screenshots of different webcams, and it'll just go on and on, right? So we can oftentimes you'll see inside people's houses, everything like that. So the idea here is that your vulnerabilities are really easy to find. Okay, so let's say we had an MSP who set up remote desktop connector, and he didn't set it up securely, and it's breaching out. Any one of these that you see, I did a quick search for anyone with remote desktop connection open and had the word financial anywhere in their security certificate. So Simone at Parish Financial, here's her computer. Sedona Financial, wherever that is, their computer's active. And so maybe you say, okay, well, it's still behind a password, right? Like it's still hard to get to. Okay, well, you saw how quick this was to come up and click on it here. If we scroll around a bit, a lot of times you'll see remote desktop, it'll just have the email address of the person using it. It could be Jill at sedonafinancial.com right here, and we would know exactly what that username is. So how do we get a password? Well, it takes another few seconds, but we would pop up a system that looked like this. It's a system called Pondernut. Okay, so I did an example here where I took a Python script and I ran it against johndoe@gmail.com. So let's pretend I ran it against Jill at sedonafinancial.com. What this is going to do, and the reason just for full disclosure here, the reason I do johndoe@gmail.com, for one, we get a lot of results, right? We found it in 269 different breaches. And then we can start to see the amount of information that we got. We found credit cards, email addresses, passwords, phone numbers, a lot of it associated with this. johndoe@gmail.com is not a real user. Okay, Gmail has blocked out this email address so that you can use it as an example. And a lot of times people use johndoe@gmail when they're signing up for a service they really don't want to use. So I use it as an example here. We're not giving away anyone's private data, but it would work just the same if we did it for your email address to figure out what breaches you were in. Just for comparison, the average executive we generally get about 8 to 10 different breaches that we find them in and the information within that breach. So the idea here is that we can go through, we can scrape, and we'll scroll down through all the scraping. And ultimately at the end, it tells us what passwords we should probably use. Three most popular, johndoe@gmail.com. So they filled in their username and password as the same just to get access to a system. And then the last one, password they used was booty for nerds, right? So always something fun to come up when you do this. But take a look at the bottom here. Take a look at how long it took me to find this person's password or a list of passwords that they would use. 231 seconds. Okay, so when you map that with the time that we did a search here, we found a remote desktop connection. We popped open some Python code and found the password, and now we're stepping in. Okay, again, really, really easy to get into a lot of these machines if they're not properly secured. You can see here's a good example. If we click on it, I mean, we can even see the names of the people that work in the firm, right? So it's going to be very easy to find what firm this is and to start knocking on that door and start trying to get in. Here was another one. I thought if you ever hear about infrastructure going, being an attack from China or whatever, here's an instance of that. This is a system in Germany. This is what we call an ICS system, an internet control system connected. Bunch of ways that you can measure it remotely, but look what happens when we click on it. It tells us what vulnerabilities are there. So we can click on here and we know exactly what we can use to attack this piece of equipment. And then down below, we have a screenshot that shows us what we can do when we get in. We can play with whatever these valves are. We can start cycles and switch systems off and see what settings we can play with, right? So this is what they talk about when they talk about infrastructure is at risk. It's really, really, really easy to find this stuff, okay? I promise half of you are going to go to shodan.io and start looking around. So here's another cool one, okay? If I go to Dallas, where I'm located, And if I zoom in, if I click on maps and zoom in, there's a bunch of webcams that run HIP cam software. Okay, so if I can just come up here, hopefully this will work. Yep, there we go. So if I just come up here and search for that software, I say in this area, in this map, show me everything that's running this particular software. Well, now I have a list of webcams that I can log into and start to get access around different parts of the city to see what's going on. And this is numerous, right? So we can even kind of go back to, if we go back to images, I can say, show me city, Dallas. And now I can see all the systems in my city that are susceptible here. You know, what are conditions like at the lake? There's a live webcam. So again, it's really easy to find what you're looking for. Kind of two things happen here, okay? Hackers use this to, one, if they have a known exploit, right? Like let's say I know I have a known exploit for Windows Server 2008, which is completely prone right now. No one's been updating it. Then I would go and search for that. So Shodan can be really, really damaging. And this is how firms get hacked. A lot of times it isn't about being targeted. You know, I think a lot of small firms say, oh, we're too small to be targeted. Sometimes it's opportunistic, right? I mean, you can see all the administrator accounts here that are just wide open to the world, okay? So that's the big thing with Shodan. If you take a look at that, couple things you can do. If you go to like whatismyip.com, find your IP. Do this at your home address too, and then go into Shodan and search your IP address and see what's there, right? Like you may be surprised if you see your remote desktop connection from one of your employees peeking out. The other thing I'll add there is this is another good run. Not only is it to check the MSP, but a lot of times employees will open remote desktop connection as well without authorization, you know, so that they can work from home and get things like that done. So let's talk about cloud auditing. Most MSPs are, in fact, all that I've ever talked to are going to have some kind of cloud deployment. And, you know, kind of keywords you're looking there to know if that's what's being used are AWS, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, Salesforce, Rackspace. And these systems are a little bit different in how you audit them, right? So, you know, if a client hires me to check their website and their email server and their laptops and their desktops and their phones, that's easy because we can just connect to those devices and check them directly. With cloud configurations, we can't, right? Remember, there's no such thing as a cloud. It's just someone else's computer, and that someone else's computer is hosting thousands of other people's data as well. So we're never going to get the authorization to be able to directly connect to that machine and test it. So what we have to do is run it through what we call benchmarks. And I'll show you an example of that here in a second, how we do that. If you've been on any of my other webinars, Nessus is my go-to equipment to do this type of work. Nessus is a kind of industry-wide vulnerability scanner. It is awesome. I've never been in an environment where I couldn't use Nessus to scan everything. The only bad thing about it is its price. You know, for a lot of firms, the $6,000 price tag and then the knowledge to use it is just not there, which I think is, you know, it makes it hard for a lot of firms to understand how to do this. What we're trying to do when we run a benchmark test is to look at that Azure or that AWS audit and check it against the compliance regulations. So for instance, is two-factor authentication enabled for every user? Are backups being stored correctly? Is encryption being done correctly? Are databases being protected correctly? We want to look at everything, the effectiveness of every security control they have in place. And at the end, I'll show you what that looks like here. I can jump into my Nessus instance. And we have an example Azure benchmark audit here. Okay, so what we do is we scan it, we load the CIS benchmark. The CIS benchmark is basically, I can't remember if it's a Microsoft organization or not, or just a collaboration with Microsoft, but basically they print these benchmarks and they say, hey, here are 300 something different settings that we need to check and make sure that they're set up securely. So we connect to Azure, we run it, and we start to get reports that look like this. We'll get items back that say, what failed against that audit. So CIS says, hey, here is the best thing that needs to be done. Like, we need to be logging activity. You can tell in this particular example, activity was not being logged anywhere, so it threw off a lot of failures. And this, to be clear, this is a true report that I ran, just been anonymized for the report here, but this is pretty typical of what we see. And all of these things are what we have to go back to the MSP and say, hey man, what gives? Like, why is this set up? Sometimes they have answers for that. And that's where that collaborative discussion comes in. If we go back to the MSP and say, hey man, why aren't you guys logging activity and logging alerts? And they say, oh, actually we are, we're just using this other software. Here's a report for that. Cool, great. Now we know what to put in our policies and procedures manual. Now we know what that report looks like, and we can put it on a recurring basis from that client. So, from that MSP. So this is what an Azure benchmark audit looks like. Ultimately, in a PDF form, kind of looks like this. You'll have a failed section. So when you click on it, it's going to tell you all the info, the solution, exactly what needs to be done, and then give you an outside reference for why it's a particular problem. So compliance is essential, right? Like, we have to make sure that even though they are putting it in the cloud, we need to know that they're securing it correctly, that they're not just doing a launch, or put it out there and let it go with default controls. So that's it, guys. I appreciate you joining. I just kind of want to show you some of those iceberg things that I see, literally within the first 5 minutes. These are things that I'm looking at and kind of getting a feel for where potential issues may be, where we need to build documentation. It's not to say every MSP is bad. In fact, some of the ones that I like working with are the ones that where we find these issues, they go, yeah, cool, man. Like, let's get this changed. And then when they do, we rerun the audit, show where we're in compliance. And those are great MSPs to work with. I will say I've never audited an MSP where we didn't have something to talk about. And sometimes they're not willing to make changes, and we have to find a different solution or write out why we're okay with it and why we're okay using it. It's not to say, again, not to say all MSPs are bad. It's just to say we need to be doing our homework, making sure that they're doing what they say they're doing, and making sure that in an SEC examination, we can prove that we know that they're doing what they say they're doing. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. Don't get too lost on Shodan.io. It is a rabbit hole of information you can find, much more entertaining than YouTube for sure. But take a look. And take a look at the Zoho toolkit as well. I'll send out links to these so you can get to them. Of course, you'll have presentation, recording of the presentation that you can look at. But start doing this work, and you're going to start to look at your IT team and your MSP and being like, hey guys, what's going on here, right? Like, here is some data leaking. And if not, fantastic. We're looking good. Then you really just have to focus on that documentation and make sure you have that documentation. So that's it, folks. Thanks again for joining. Please reach out. My contact information is there on the screen. And if you can't tell, this is definitely a topic I love discussing and discussing with clients and anyone who asks questions on it. So please feel free to reach out if anything comes to mind. And of course, you'll receive an email with links to all the information from this webinar. So thanks again for joining, folks. Hope you have a great day.